Let's read some more scary Reddit stories. When I was 8, I had a friend spending the night one night. It was super late and we were playing Barbies in the living room. I then suddenly got the feeling like we were being watched. I looked to my right and there in the window stood a man. I remember everything about him till this day. This was a little over 20 years ago. He was a white man. I could tell because he was wearing a short-sleeved dark blue t-shirt that had a little pocket on the chest. His arms were very hairy. He also wore black gloves and a black ski mask. He had his hands cupped on either side of his face to block any glare from the streetlights to get a better view of us. I yelped and curled into a ball. My friend saw him and did the same thing. She asked me what we were going to do. I said, at the count of 3, we're going to run upstairs and get my dad. I got to 2 and took off. My friend was right behind me. We barged into my dad's room to tell him. He leapt out of bed and ran outside, but the guy was gone. Found out years later that there was a rapist on the loose in the area at the time. When I was like in 4th or 5th grade, I lived with my mom and her girlfriend in a 2-bedroom apartment. Well, we had strange things sort of happen around the house, but I was young, imaginative. One day we woke up, well, rather my mom's girlfriend woke up, and soon I was being shaken awake. What the fuck did you do to the kitchen? I was like, I stay in my room pretty much all the time. She yanks me out of bed and drags me by my arm to the kitchen. My mom is standing in the doorway of their bedroom right next to mine. I look and see cocoa powder all over the counter, like Nesquik. Now, we were pretty fucking poor back then, like my meal at school was 75% of what I got to eat in a day. I swore up and down I didn't do it, but as soon as I got closer, there were little handprints all in the cocoa, smearing and smacking it everywhere, on the cupboards, the fridge. It was on the floor even, with little footprints. My hands were clean, my feet were clean, but I was the only child in the house, and they sure as hell didn't think someone broke in, or hell, not even a ghost. What if it was like a little gnome or something that broke into y'all's house? Like a little duende. That's creepy. I had just moved to a new city and was living on my own for the first time. I worked late night shifts at my job and rode a bike home a fair distance. It was about 1 a.m. and I was riding my bike home when I began to approach the local elementary school. The school was on the opposite side of the street, lit up from the inside with those orange lights they turn on at night. As I began to approach the school, I noticed something strange. I couldn't really make it out, but something seemed off. I stared hard, squinting to see it better as I got closer and closer. Then, as the school was directly across from me, I saw a little girl standing inside the school, staring out the door at me. I flipped my shit and pedaled my ass off. After a few moments, I kinda got a grip and looked back over my shoulder, and there she was, standing on the sidewalk staring at me. I rode home like a bat out of hell and avoided that street like the plague for weeks. At about 2 a.m., our neighbor rang our doorbell and was banging on the door. My dad opened the door and she said something about her brother, who was mentally handicapped, unaliving her parents and locking her in the closet. He thought she was just having a nightmare, but it turns out she was telling the truth. Cops were called. The guy is in the insane asylum now. Neighbor still lives in that house. I was walking with my older brother one night. We were returning from a game he had had. It was probably about 9 or 10 p.m. at the time. I was maybe 10. For some perspective, I'm now 18 going on 19. We were approaching the apartment building I live in and we saw a figure. He was probably the size of an average man. Not surprisingly, the darkness conceals his upper body, including his face. We stopped dead in our tracks. Usually security guards patrol the grounds at this time, but their rounds start at 11. This really shouldn't have scared us, but he started to run toward us. Sprint. He was running really, really fast at us. My older brother screamed at me to run. He chased us for an entire length of a street until my older brother told me to go under a fence that is arching above the ground, perfect for our sizes. We were scared shitless as we saw him try to climb over the fence, but luckily we were very close to home. A week later, we found out that a child went missing the night after we escaped. To this day, the child was never found. I worked as a security guard for a mall. I was stuck with the night shift. The car was broken, so I rode a bike around the outside of the mall. It was about midnight when I heard someone yelling for help and waving his arms towards me. I pedaled like a fucking madman to get over to him. He looked 17 and was poorly dressed for the season. It was winter. I ask what's wrong and he tells me, my friend won't get up. So I say, all right, let me call someone. I reached for my phone to call 911, but then the guy grabbed onto me and another man came out of the bushes near us with a pew-pew pointed to my head. Long story short, I got mugged at pew-pew point while they handcuffed me with my own handcuffs. I thought I was going to get great. I was in the Grand Canyon a few weeks ago camping in a tent with some friends. Around 11, I was still awake but everyone else was asleep, and suddenly some woman started screaming from what sounded like a few campsites over. They weren't joking around or they were very good actors. They sounded terrified. They screamed for about 10 seconds, at first 2 or 3 of them, then eventually just one. The screaming stopped and I heard someone much closer to our tent start running, then a car door slammed but the car never started. No one else woke up and I was too scared to move even to get my phone. I didn't fall asleep until the sun was coming up. And that is why I don't go camping, y'all.
1986, 35 million Americans went to see the brand new movie Crocodile Dundee, which was a comedy that starred this very capable and rugged Australian crocodile hunter who goes to New York City. One of the 35 million Americans who saw this film was a 24-year-old model from Virginia named Ginger Meadows. And after seeing this film, Ginger felt inspired to actually go to Australia to see it for herself because it looked so amazing in this movie. So a couple of months later, in March of 1987, Ginger, by herself, hops on a plane and flies to Perth, which is a major city in Western Australia. And her plan was she would land in Australia and then work odd jobs to make a little bit of cash, and then use that cash to fund her travels all over the country. And then at some point, after she was tired of doing that, she would head back to the United States. So she lands in Perth, and immediately she sees her first opportunity to make some money. There had been this huge sailing competition in the city leading up to the weekend she arrived there. And so she saw all these luxury yachts anchored at all these docks along the coastline. And Ginger's thinking to herself, you know, these huge ships, they have crews that work on them basically full time. Maybe one of these boats could use an extra set of hands. And so Ginger, who was very friendly and outgoing, she went right down to one of these docks and she stopped in front of the very first yacht she saw, which was this huge luxury 100-foot yacht. And she introduced herself to the captain of this boat. And she said, hey, you know, can I hitch a ride with you guys to the next place you're going? And in exchange, I'll work for you. And as it happened, the captain was actually looking for another crew member to assist their chef. And so he said, okay, well, can you cook? And Ginger said, yeah, I'm a great cook. And he said, okay, well, you're hired. You can be the chef's assistant. And so Ginger, she climbs on board and she meets the rest of the 5 other crew members, including the chef who she'd be working with. And the chef's name was Jane, and those two would become very close. And then shortly after Ginger had come aboard, the captain cast off their lines and they headed out to sea. Their next stop was going to be New Guinea, which was roughly 14 days of travel away. After about a week at sea, the captain realized they were dangerously low on fresh water. And so he decided to take a detour and turn east and head inland along this river system that would bring them to this large freshwater pool, which he also knew had this huge waterfall that dumped down into it. And so he figured they could go right underneath this waterfall and fill up their jugs with all this fresh water and then head back out and they'd be good. So on the morning of March 29th, the captain anchored the yacht out at sea near the mouth of this river system, and then he lowered the yacht's dinghy, which is a smaller, more agile boat. And once that was in the water, he, Ginger, Jane, and the rest of the crew, they hop in this dinghy along with all these large empty water jugs, and they begin making their way towards this river. And so they're traveling up this river for a little while, and then finally they get to this huge freshwater pool, and right in front of them is this amazing waterfall, and everybody is just totally awestruck by this waterfall. It's like a gem in the middle of nowhere, because they're in very rugged Australia at this point. And so the captain, he brings the dinghy right near the base of the waterfall, and one by one they hold up their water jugs and they fill them with fresh water, and then they're about to turn and go back out to sea and get back on their yacht when the captain thinks to himself, you know what, we've been at sea for 7 days straight, it's been very monotonous, maybe it would be a good thing to stick around here for a little bit longer and maybe even hike up to the top of this waterfall and enjoy the view and kind of enjoy the scenery before we head back out to sea. And so he says to his crew, hey, do you guys want to go to the top of this waterfall? And everyone agrees it's a great idea, with the exception of Jane. She did not feel like hiking to the top of this waterfall. She said she would stay down in the dinghy and wait for them. Now, this pool is basically surrounded on all sides by just pure cliff face. There really is no place to land this dinghy. There's no flat surfaces. branches. You basically have cliffs that go directly into water, and then also you have the river that feeds back out to the ocean. So the captain brings the dinghy right up against the cliff face right next to this waterfall, and he and Ginger and the other crew members not named Jane climb out of the dinghy onto this cliff face, and they begin climbing, literally climbing up this wall towards the top of the waterfall. Now, everyone was able to do it except for Ginger. She kept slipping on the rocks. It was very steep. It seemed kind of dangerous. And so at some point, she abandons the idea and goes back down to the dinghy with Jane, and the captain and the rest of the crew, they continue up towards the top. And so as Ginger and Jane are sitting in the dinghy watching the other crew members making their way up, they start feeling a little bit left out, and they're like, you know what? Let's try to find an alternate way up to the top of this waterfall. And so they begin scanning out across this pool at the other cliffs kind of surrounding it, and it looked like on the very other side of the pool, there was a less severe cliff face that maybe they would have an easier time climbing up. And so the two women, they jump into the murky brown water and begin swimming directly across this pool towards this other cliff. And when they make it about a third of the way, Jane suddenly stops, and Ginger notices and turns around and looks at Jane, and she's like, what's going on? And Jane would tell her, you know, something just feels off. This doesn't feel right. Let's go back to the dinghy. Let's just forget about this. But Ginger is like, come on, we're so close. Let's just keep going. It'll be awesome once we get to the top of this waterfall. And so Jane, she's totally hesitant, but she says, okay, fine. And they both continue to swim. And then all of a sudden, they hear their captain, who is now on top of the waterfall, screaming down to them to get out of the water right now. And they notice he is pointing down at the pool in a direction slightly away from where they were. And so they're looking up at him, and they're following his finger down to the part of the pool he's pointing at, and they see there is this tidal wave of water coming towards them. It is a 12-foot long saltwater crocodile that has noticed them, and it is charging straight at them. Now, Jane and Ginger knew they were too far away from the dinghy to be able to swim to it before this crocodile was going to reach them, and so their next best choice was just to turn and swim towards the nearest cliff face, because again, there is no place to get out of the water. There's only cliffs. And so they swim towards this cliff face, which is right on the edge of the bottom of the waterfall, and so water is landing on them, and they reach the cliff face, and they're trying to climb up and pull themselves out of the water, but there's nowhere to grab onto. It's all totally slick. There's no good handholds, and so all they have is this little ledge that is in the water that they're standing on, but they're still halfway into the water. And so after they struggle for a minute trying to pull themselves out of the water, and they realize they can't do it, they both just turn around and they lock arms and they look out through the water that's falling down in front of them into the pool, and they see this crocodile has followed them, and it is now stopped right on the other side of the water that's falling down, and it's just staring at them with its mouth wide open. And the two women are looking at it. They don't know what to do, and the captain and the other crew members, they see what's going on, and they're trying to climb down as fast as they possibly can to try to rescue them, but it's going to take several minutes at least before they get down to the dinghy. And so Jane and Ginger, they're totally aware of this, and they're just staring at this crocodile, screaming at it, trying to get it to go away. And at some point, the crocodile does just close its mouth and sink below the surface. But now they don't know where it is, and this causes Ginger to completely panic, and she lets go of Jane's arm, and she dives into the water off to the right and attempts to swim away from the crocodile back over to the boat. But Ginger only made it 2 strokes before the crocodile suddenly re-emerged underneath her and grabbed her by the waist and pulled her under the water. Jane is just standing there watching all of this happen in front of her. She has no idea what to do. The crew is still not down in the dinghy, so she's totally stranded, and she's just staring at the area where Ginger has been pulled below the surface. And just seconds after she's been pulled under, the crocodile re-emerges with its head pointed towards Jane, and in its jaws is Ginger. And Ginger's got her arms up over her head. She's wide-eyed, and she's looking right at Jane. And Jane makes eye contact with her, but there's nothing she can do. And she just watched as Ginger again was pulled back under, and this time she did not come up again. Ultimately, Jane would be rescued from the ledge. The crew would get down to the dinghy, they'd swing over, they would pick her up, and then about 2 days later, they would find what was left of Ginger's remains. It would turn out the captain was well aware of the threat the crocodiles posed in this river, and he had told his crew, Ginger and Jane included, about this threat, and that at no point should anyone get in this water. But of course, his warning went unheeded.
I think my ex is stalking me. but he's been dead for 6 years. I met Lucas when I was at uni. I was studying French and we were both doing our year abroad together in Toulouse. He was Swedish and one of the most handsome men I've ever met. I thought I was nowhere near his league. He was sporty, tanned, brooding and quiet. I was bookish, nerdy, unsure of myself, and the only sport I was moderately confident at was ping pong after a lot of beers. When we made out one balmy evening after a bunch of foreign students went out dancing, he said he liked how different I was. I was mysterious to him. I didn't question it. We became inseparable. He took on my interests in indie cinema, photography. He became possessive of my time, but I was in love and I didn't care. He moved to London to be with me. He said he didn't really have close friends and his family were pretty distant and cold. The move was a no-brainer. We got a small place in Kilburn, northwest London. It was sort of grotty, but the rent was cheap and we had each other. Lucas got a job pretty fast, something financy, and our lives carried on. He said he worried about me and insisted I download Life 360 so he could make sure I was always okay. Which I think is, you know, the app where you could, like, couples get it so you can see where the other one is. My friends said diplomatically things like they found him difficult to get to know, that he was a closed book. I explained he was shy, but they never really met my eye when I tried to justify him. I admit, sometimes Lucas would get jealous. He said I was beautiful, but he knew other men thought that too. He said it sometimes made him lose sleep. I'd reassure him that I only had eyes for him. He said he would be so upset if I loved another man. One night for a Halloween party, we dressed as Captain Hook and Tinkerbell. I remember we'd had a particularly nasty row before we got there. Lucas told me the tutu was far too short.
Oh.
That men would see my bum and lust after me, perv on me.
Weird couple. Captain Hook and Tinkerbell.
I was just going to say that.
I told him I looked frazzled and ridiculous, a woman in a stupid fairy costume. I hadn't made it sexy in the slightest. The tights were thick and lurid snot green, and I was holding a dumb wand with furry stars shooting out from the end.
She doesn't have a wand.
He wouldn't listen. He said I liked to hurt him. He said I'd be sorry if I didn't change. Of course I didn't change. I told him he was being unfair. Anyway, we got to the house party, and Lucas went missing. I hadn't seen him for most of the night, but I was annoyed at him, so I didn't care. I figured he was just in a different part of the house, sulking. After some drinks and catching up and dancing, I started to look for him. He wouldn't be hard to miss with a huge pirate hat and a hook for a hand. I spent a lot of the night chatting with my old friend from school, Fred, and for some reason, I had a knot in my stomach. Had Lucas stormed out? I mean, Fred was just a friend, but he didn't like me having male friends. I started to panic. I called him, but there was no answer. Fred asked if I was okay. I explained I needed to find Lucas. He agreed to help me look. We scanned the house, then explored over the road to the nondescript park opposite. Under a streetlight, on a dark path near the tennis courts, I saw him. Lucas. He was just standing there, staring at me, like he'd been waiting for me to find him, and the silly hat was gone. I just noticed the hook dangling from one hand at his side. Fred called out, "Where have you been? Sophie's been worried sick." Lucas kept staring at me. His face was contorted with rage. Then he did something that will stay with me forever. He lifted up the hook, and he jabbed it into the side of his neck. Then he drew it horizontally across his throat. I'll never forget the blood pouring, or the sound of Fred screaming. I fell to the pavement and my life was never the same. I still get nightmares about what I saw, watching Lucas die like that. I sometimes think it was my fault that he did it. Friends tell me he was disturbed, that he wanted to hurt me, that he was malicious and evil, but I can't accept that. I know I shouldn't, but sometimes I do miss him. But that was 6 years ago. I've since moved on. I live in Bristol now. Me and Fred actually became an item. I don't know if we trauma bonded, but we're a great support to one another, and he's incredibly kind. Therapy's helped me a huge deal, but I still carry what happened with me in a dark compartment of my brain. If this story wasn't already weird, it only gets a lot weirder. Over the years, I sometimes think I see Lucas. In the corner of my eye, standing below a streetlight, standing in a park, near a mall. I knew it was because I must have PTSD, and I tried in those moments to control my breathing and just keep walking, focusing on looking directly ahead. Fred, after he's had a few drinks, sheepishly says he thinks he sees Lucas too. But then it started to get more real. We got engaged, and the day after the proposal, while Fred was at work, I was putting the recycling out, and on the doorstep was that furry wand. It was spattered in blood. I looked up and down the street, my heart beating fast, but I never found out who put it there. More recently, I was on my way back from a work trip, and I got a notification on my phone. Unknown tracker alert. AirTag detected near you. I've never seen anything like this before. I was taking a windy backstreet walk to get back to my flat, and I checked the alert at my front door, and it showed that the tag was tracking my movements. I could see it on the map, red dots indicating my exact route home. Fred was away visiting family, and I just went into the flat by myself, and I felt uneasy. I unpacked my things and tried to get comfy before I gave it more thought. I did a quick Google. It said to do a manual scan. It said AirTag detected. I followed a prompt to play the sound. If there was a tag on me, it would beep. I hit play. I heard it distantly, but where was it coming from? I wheeled round. There was a beeping coming from my bedroom.
No, under the bed! No! No!
My heart was racing. I ran down the corridor into my room. I upended my bag. I searched my coat pockets. Nothing. I pressed play again. Louder this time. My bed. I could hear it from the top of my bed, near my pillow. I grabbed the pillow up, and there it was. Small, tiny, little shining silver badge of a thing. I twirled it to and fro between my fingers, scrutinizing the tiny thing. I paused. Chills swept over me. Scratched into the surface over the Apple logo was a crudely engraved wand. And overlain on top of that, a hook.
Oh my God.
I called Fred. He calmed me down. We had no idea how to explain it. We'd both been away and the flat hadn't been occupied for a couple of days, but had someone let themselves in? Was this a cruel prank? I called the police and they asked for the serial ID. They cross-checked it, identified the purchaser as a Lucas Lundahl. Did I know him? I started to sob uncontrollably. Whoever was behind this was incredibly nasty, playing with my grief. I destroyed the little tag, hammering it with a particularly heavy pepper grinder, and I told Fred to come home as soon as he was able. He said he would. I sat on my bed and tried to calm my breath. I shut all the curtains and I went back to the living room. My stomach dropped. Someone was at the front door. I padded down the corridor, craning my neck to see if I could see anything beyond the frosted glass. I stopped. The porch light was illuminating a figure. One hand was pressed against the glass, but the other, well, the other was a hook. I know now Lucas will never let me be happy with another man. I took a long, steadying breath. I walked towards the door. I need to know who's on the other side.
Halloween is already a day that scares a lot of people, and for most, it's all just pretend. You're expecting to see all of the creepy costumes and be scared by people, and usually none of it's real, so it's okay. But for this woman right here, it was real. She dressed up as a bunny and went to a fun Halloween costume party in 2001, but she vanished after this, never to be seen again. Her disappearance was later possibly connected to two things: a disturbing abduction that took place over 200 miles from her home, where a woman who looked a lot like her was seen screaming and crying for help, being forced into a car by an unknown man. That, and a terrifying serial killer who was later uncovered in the area. He had the badly damaged and charred remains of at least 12 people on his property, and police believe that one of them could be this girl that went missing. This is the mysterious disappearance of Cindy Song, and what happened to her on Halloween so many years ago was real and more disturbing than you can imagine. So let's talk about it. This is Cindy Song. She was 23 years old when she disappeared on Halloween night in 2001. Cindy grew up in South Korea, but she moved to Virginia in 1995 to attend high school, where she lived with her aunt and uncle. She was known to be really independent and spontaneous, but she was also really smart, hardworking, and responsible. After she graduated high school, she moved on to attend Penn State University, and in 2001, she was a senior and an art major. She had amazing grades, which was a huge accomplishment because she was working 2 jobs at the same time while attending school. By all means, Cindy was loving her time at the college and had her whole life ahead of her. But that Halloween, this amazing life would be ripped from her. That night, Cindy and 2 of her best friends, Stacy and Lisa, got dressed up in their Halloween costumes. I don't know what her friends went as, but Cindy was a really cute bunny. Once they were finished getting ready, they all went to a costume party at Players Nightclub in State College, Pennsylvania. The night was going really great, and everyone was having a good time, and at around 2 a.m., the 3 friends decided to leave the nightclub and go to a friend's house nearby to play some video games. They stayed there for another 2 hours, and just before 4 a.m., they decided to call it a night and go home. Lisa and Stacy dropped Cindy off at her apartment right around 4 a.m. They didn't stay to watch her actually enter her apartment, but they felt like it was okay to leave because Cindy was waving goodbye to them. No one knew it at the time, but this would be the last time that Cindy would ever be seen. The next day, when no one could get a hold of her, they all had this gut feeling that something was wrong. So they notified the Ferguson Township Police Department. When the police went to her apartment to see if she was okay, they came across a seemingly normal scene, but Cindy wasn't answering the door. Authorities found no sign of forced entry, and when they let themselves inside her apartment, the mystery only deepened. No sign of a struggle or foul play, but Cindy was just gone. This is when Cindy was officially reported missing, and police found evidence that she did go inside of her apartment the night she went missing. Inside, police found the fake eyelashes that she wore to the Halloween party, along with her backpack and phone. This immediately was a red flag to her friends because Cindy apparently never went anywhere without her phone, so this was odd. The only thing that was missing outside of Cindy herself was her purse with her driver's license and credit cards, and her bunny Halloween costume. This is when her friends mentioned that Cindy would often go to a 24-hour supermarket close to her apartment sometimes after partying, so police retraced her steps, but still, they found no sign of Cindy. This led authorities to believe that Cindy did in fact leave her apartment that night in her bunny costume from the party, and likely went to the 24-hour supermarket, and she was either abducted there or on the way. And it seems as though she left her apartment willingly because she locked the door from the outside on her way out. So either something happened to her at the supermarket, or police believe that she could have left her apartment with someone she knew who then killed her after the fact. Cindy's phone records showed that she didn't make or receive any phone calls after she was dropped off at her apartment at 4 that morning, and there was no activity on her credit cards either. Police and hundreds of volunteers searched every place they thought Cindy could be, including a wooded area near the Penn State campus, but they found no trace of her. It's like she vanished into thin air. One thing was very clear though, and that was that she didn't leave on her own free will. Police found 2 upcoming Britney Spears concert tickets in her apartment, and she'd also just bought this really nice computer that was about to be delivered the following month. Cindy's friends and family say that she wouldn't just disappear like this. She wasn't depressed or suicidal, and her friends say that she was really happy and upbeat the night she went missing. So this leaves one option really, and it's that someone took Cindy and made her disappear. Just when police thought this investigation couldn't get any stranger, 3 days after she disappeared, a witness saw someone who looked identical to Cindy being forced into a car by an unknown man. This took place in Philadelphia's Chinatown district, which is over 200 miles away from her home. The witness saw who he thought could be Cindy screaming and crying for help, and the man they saw yelled at them to leave. This was the composite sketch of the man based off what the witness saw. Police don't know if this woman was really Cindy or not, or who the man even was, as he has never been found, but they would still like to question him in regards to this case. There would be no new developments in this case for another 2 years, and honestly, this possible connection is really disturbing. So in 2003, a pharmacist named Michael Kurkowski and his girlfriend, Tammy Fassett, mysteriously disappeared. At first, Michael's family didn't think much of it and honestly thought he just dipped, because he was facing a 40-year jail sentence for selling prescription medications illegally and insurance fraud. They thought that since he was in some hot water, that he just willingly left with his girlfriend, but they quickly found that this was not the case. Shortly after the couple was reported missing, a man named Paul W. came forward and told police that they needed to look into Hugo Selensky, who was a local man with a lengthy criminal history. Paul said that Hugo told him that he and Michael, the now missing man, had kidnapped Cindy that fateful night and took her back to Michael's house. Together, they assaulted her for hours until she died, and then they disposed of her body on Hugo's massive property, which Paul said they needed to search because there's probably a lot of people buried there. So police went to Hugo's property, and there they found 5 bodies. 2 drug dealers, Michael Kurkowski and his girlfriend Tammy, and 1 body that they can't identify because it was so badly damaged. Police also found several bone fragments from a burn pile that belonged to as many as 12 victims. So it turns out that hiding in plain sight was Hugo, a serial killer that somehow went undetected for a while. Since the remains found on his property were too damaged to identify, police suspect that one of them could be Cindy, but they've never been able to physically prove it. Hugo eventually did confess to kidnapping Cindy that night, but according to him, it was Michael who killed her, and then he kept her bunny ears from her costume as a souvenir. Despite all of the bodies found on his property, Hugo was only charged with the murders of Michael and Tammy, and then he was sentenced to life in prison. What's crazy though is that Hugo somehow escaped from the maximum security prison where he was being held, using bed sheets to scale down the building, and then he used a mattress to cover the barbed wire fence. He was caught 3 days later and sent back to prison, where he remains to this day. Hugo is still considered a suspect in the disappearance of Cindy's song, but as of 2025, her body has never been found, despite the countless searches on Hugo's property. Cindy's case is so scary to me and honestly eye-opening because this could happen to any of us. She was simply out just trying to have fun on Halloween, and unbeknownst to her, someone was watching her that night, just waiting for the right opportunity to strike. And it's especially scary in this case because there's no body and no crime scene. She was taken in a matter of minutes, and whoever did it left no trace of anything behind. That is absolutely terrifying. But it's now been 24 years, and whatever happened to Cindy that Halloween night remains a mystery.
I'm going to show you something very, very sad, and it might make you cry. It made me cry, and it's a little boy talking about his sister passing and what their mom did to her. And I just have to give a mental health warning. It's a 7-year-old little boy, and it's very, very difficult to watch, and it's very, very hard to forget. So if you think that listening to something like this is going to harm your mental health, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one.
Can you tell me what a lie is?
It's not the truth.
Who is this, or what is this?
My mama.
Okay. And what is she doing?
Killing my sister.
How is she doing that, AJ?
Putting her hand over her face.
That woman sitting right there between them. Have you ever seen her before?
Yes, sir.
Who is that?
My mother.
AJ,
Yes, sir.
give me your hand. All right. Here. Here.
I saw that video on my For You page and I just couldn't stop thinking about little AJ, so I looked into the details of the story and now I'm going to share it with you. On August 8th of 2007, authorities received a 911 call from Amanda Lewis. She was calling to report that her little girl, Adriana Hutto, had fallen into the pool and she was blue and unconscious. Amanda Lewis was a single mother living in Esto, Florida with her 2 children, 7-year-old Adriana and 6-year-old AJ. The kids had different fathers. Amanda worked as a nurse assistant in a hospital and she was often gone for long periods of time overnight working night shifts. And oftentimes she would have family and friends help her out with the kids. And raising 2 little kids is not easy, but for Amanda, she found it to be even harder because of Adriana. Adriana had been diagnosed with ADHD, meaning that her brain just worked a little bit different, and she was always excited and curious and full of ideas. She had a lot of energy and big emotions that would make it hard for her to sit still and remain focused because every hour of the day she was full of energy. She was such a happy, imaginative little kid, but she often did need a little bit of help just staying organized and on task, and learning how to work with her personality was hard for Amanda. Even when Adriana was just a little baby, Amanda would say that she had a really hard time bonding with her daughter. Whereas on the other hand, AJ was described to be still very sweet, very kind, very good kids, but he was more so reserved. So the kids were different in that way. And neighbors would often see Amanda losing her patience with Adriana on a regular basis. The morning of August 8th in 2007, Amanda had just gone home from a night shift and she went off to go take a nap, leaving the kids alone to watch TV. And in their backyard, they had one of those pools, like the above ground pools, but the kids were not allowed to play in it unless Amanda or a different adult was supervising them. The pool itself was 4 feet high, so it was hard for the kids to be able to get into the pool by themselves, but they had a little ladder, and when they were not swimming, Amanda would lock away the ladder in their storage shed in the backyard. So eventually Amanda gets up, she starts getting the things together to go out, leave the house with the kids to go run some errands, while Adriana and AJ were playing outside. At some point, according to Amanda, AJ walked inside and he said, "Mom, Adriana is in the pool." But apparently Amanda didn't think anything of it because she knew the ladder was locked away in the shed, and on top of that, Adriana was known to be terrified of water, so it's not like she would have voluntarily gone into the pool by herself, especially knowing that she wasn't allowed to. So Amanda assumed that AJ meant that Adriana was just playing around the pool, so she stayed inside when AJ walked back outside. When she eventually did walk outside, she saw AJ trying to pull his sister out of the water with his little hand, and that's when, according to her, for the first time she realized that Adriana was inside of the pool, completely underwater. She rushed over, pulled her out, saw that she was purple and blue, and she called 911. When paramedics arrived, they saw Amanda sitting on the ground near the pool. They saw Adriana laying on the ground. They rushed over to try and help her because at that point she was still alive. They rushed her over to the hospital in an ambulance, but despite their best efforts, after less than an hour of being in the hospital, 7-year-old Adriana Hutto was gone. Shortly before she passed, when doctors were still holding on to hope, they were explaining the situation to Amanda and they asked her if she had any questions. She only had one question, which was, "Where is the vending machine?" That was her question. When they informed her that her daughter was gone, the doctor said that Amanda showed zero emotion. Adriana's autopsy showed that she passed due to being underwater for too long, and it was ruled an accident and the case was closed. Amanda went to the hospital with Adriana in the ambulance. AJ was taken by his grandparents back to their house to try and get him to cope with what he had just just witnessed. Authorities were completely treating this like a tragic accident. They saw a little wagon next to the pool as well as a pan of sorts inside of the pool. And it was their belief that the kids wanted to play in the pool, but before playing, they wanted to get the bugs out. So they assumed that Adriana stood on top of the little wagon, reached into the water with the pan to try and scoop out the bugs, accidentally fell in, and then was unable to get out. But as soon as one of the sheriffs got back to the police station, he got a call from AJ's grandparents, and they told him that they needed to talk to AJ immediately for him to tell them what he had just told his grandparents. So AJ was taken to the station, and he sat down with investigators. In his first interview, he said, quote, "Mama dunked Adriana into the pool," end quote. And in his second interview, he said, quote, "Mama threw my sister Adriana into the pool," end quote. He said Adriana started screaming and said, quote, "Mama said stop it, so I did stop it. So Adriana screamed, 'AJ, called the police,' end quote." He said that his mom held down Adriana's face and he put his little hand over his face to show the investigators how she did it. And he said that his mom did that because she got mad at Adriana for spraying cleaning supplies inside of the house. Now, of course, AJ was 6 years old at the time, and authorities knew that, and they knew they had to take this into consideration, that little kids often say things that are not true. But it's the way in which he told the story, the way that his story was always the same, no matter how many different times he told it, that really struck a nerve for them. That, on top of the fact that doctors said that her reaction to losing her daughter was extremely weird, was enough for investigators to make the decision to reopen the case, and they began searching for the house for anything that could help them figure out what really happened that day. And the biggest thing that stood out to them, other than the fact that the house was absolutely filthy and dirty and smelled like urine, was the fact that despite having 2 small children, there were no toys at all. When they asked Amanda about this, she said that she would take the kids' toys away as punishment and she would lock them in the outdoor shed. But when they checked the outdoor shed, there were 0 signs of toys. And when they started talking to people who often interacted with Amanda and her kids, they said that Amanda was very harsh on Adriana specifically, and some neighbors even had reason to believe that both of the kids were extremely neglected. Amanda was brought in for questioning, and she was told what AJ had said happened. Of course, she denied it. She said that AJ was just a little kid with a big imagination, and she actually did agree to take a polygraph test. She did pass it, but that wasn't enough to change the minds of law enforcement. And in September of 2007, Amanda was charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors offered her a plea deal, giving her the opportunity to plead guilty to manslaughter, avoid a trial altogether, and serve a 10-year-long sentence. But she did not accept it. She wanted to go to trial, and her trial began in February of 2008. AJ, now 7 years old, was the primary witness for the prosecution. The defense tried everything in their power to keep AJ off the stand, saying that he was an unreliable witness, that he was too young, and that his story changed too many times. But the court disagreed, because no matter how many times little details shifted, one thing in AJ's story remained the same: the fact that he saw his mother intentionally hold his sister underwater. During the trial, the jury was shown autopsy photos and they heard medical evidence. Adriana had fingerprint-shaped bruises on her forehead, cheeks, and chin, injuries that matched AJ's story of events exactly. And when prosecutors asked Dr. Fox to demonstrate how those bruises could have been made, she slowly raised her hand and pressed it down on her face, mimicking the exact same motion that AJ used when he showed investigators what his mom had done. And it was in that moment that I think it sunk in for everyone that AJ had witnessed what he had been saying this entire time. The trial lasted 4 days, and it took the jury less than 2 hours to find Amanda Lewis guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2010, she appealed her sentence, but that was denied. Yeah, I feel like this case is a controversial one in the way that some people think that AJ was absolutely 100% saying the truth, versus others do think that he was too young and that he could have been lying. But I want to know what you guys think. I just had to cover this story because I saw that video of AJ and it's gonna live in my head for years. That is all I have for today's story. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Adriana's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Before we dive into the story, I want to clarify that I have 4 sisters and I'm the youngest among them. We have an age gap of 8+ years and are distinctly different from one another. My second older sister, Victoria, has a unique connection to the spiritual realm. She can see and communicate with ghosts. I have plenty of stories growing up with her. While I'm not entirely certain when she became aware of these abilities, as far back as I can remember, she's always had spooky things happen to her. My mother was quite supportive of this. Being Mexican, we grew up learning about numerous superstitions and legends. Given my own encounters with the supernatural at a young age, I believed it all. Now, let's move on to the story. When we were young, my sisters and I moved frequently due to financial reasons, or my mom would get fed up living in certain places. One year, when I was probably in kindergarten or pre-kinder, yes, that young, I have vivid memories from that time. We moved into a duplex. This was probably the largest home we'd ever had. It had 4 bedrooms. The 2 oldest sisters each got their own rooms. The twins shared a bedroom, and my mother and I shared her room since I couldn't sleep alone. After moving into the duplex, my grandmother, who lived about 10 minutes away, decided to stay with us temporarily to help with unpacking and taking care of us while my mom was at work, who had 3 jobs at the time and wasn't home much. Now, our backyard in the duplex wasn't really a backyard. It was surrounded by woods or a forested area. This made it look quite eerie at night. One night, my mom was still at work. We had dinner, showered, and we were getting ready for bed. My mom had come home late from work, so everyone was already asleep. So at the time, my sister Victoria was in her room alone with the radio on, asleep. Just as my mom was about to drift off to sleep in her own bed, she heard my sister screaming for her. My mom hurried to her room. She burst through the door and turned on the lights, asking, "Victoria, what's happening? Why are you screaming?" My sister appeared annoyed and replied, "Mom, tell Selena to go to sleep already. She keeps waking me up and messing with the radio." I'm Selena, the youngest sister. At the time, I was already fast asleep, dreaming of Candy and Brad's dolls beside my grandma. My mom was confused and said, "Victoria, what are you talking about? Selena's already asleep with grandma in my room." My sister didn't believe her and said, "Mom, Selena is right there behind you next to the radio. How do you not see her?" My mom looked around and saw no one. "Victoria, I think you were just dreaming. It's late and I'm tired. Go back to sleep now." As my mom left her room, my sister said, "Selena, just go to sleep with my mom already." My mom ignored her and returned to her room where my grandma and I were sleeping. She shook me to check if I was awake or faking, but I was sound asleep. My mom found it strange but was too tired to dwell on it, so she tried to go back to sleep. Now, let me share the story from my sister's perspective.
The Great Depression is the reason that dog food must now meet the standards for human consumption. People were so desperate just to survive during this time that they were eating things like dog food. They were even eating roadkill out of necessity. They hunted for pigeons, squirrels, rats, stray cats, and dogs, which obviously led to a huge uprising of diseases like hantavirus and salmonella. Black Americans and Mexican Americans were disproportionately affected during this time, as they were often the first ones to lose their jobs. Imagine being raised in a country where the law is just now starting to recognize you as a human being. You're finally given the ability to work for a living and make a wage to support and raise your family, just for a financial crisis to come and take it all away. And now you're fighting for the survival of yourself and your children. There were also over 1 million Mexican Americans who were deported or pressured to leave the states, even if they were a U.S. citizen. Around 300,000 teenagers left their families to begin hopping trains to look for work elsewhere in the country, but they were often killed by guards or would die from falling under the wheels. As you can imagine, there were a lot of people dying during this time, but people couldn't afford funeral costs. I mean, they couldn't even afford medical care that would keep themselves from dying. So many of the bodies of those who passed were buried in unmarked graves. Children were often abandoned at orphanages or sold, and the self-elimination rate went up nearly 50%. Despite widespread starvation, 6 million pigs were slaughtered and wasted by farmers acting under government order. Hundreds of thousands of cattle were killed for nothing under the government's Emergency Livestock Reduction Program, which is essentially a program designed to raise the value of agricultural goods, because if you have too much of something, it becomes less valuable and you're not able to capitalize on it. A version of this program still exists today, and while the government did pay farmers for their cattle or other goods that were destroyed so they wouldn't face bankruptcy from a lack of profit, wasting food when hundreds of thousands of people are dying from starvation is a very controversial move and just plain tragic.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up,"
might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Single state in the US has had at least one serial killer, if not multiple, and today I'm going to tell you guys about the worst serial killer from Idaho. If you're new here, this is a map of all the states I've covered so far. This is part 30 of 50. So today I'm going to tell you guys about Idaho, and before I begin, a lot of people asked about Brian Koberger. I'm not going to talk about him in this video. I'm going to be talking about someone else, but if you guys would like me to talk about that case, I can do a separate video on that. Today I'm going to be telling you guys about Thomas Eugene Creech. He was born September 9th of 1950 in Ohio. He had a very unstable childhood. His parents constantly argued, they got divorced. It was just like a very messy, unstable, unhealthy childhood for him. Sometime when he was a child, he ran away from home and he became a drifter. I think it was like in his mid-teens, but I couldn't find the exact time that he did this. In 1969, when he was 19, he was arrested for armed robbery, but he took a plea deal. He was only sentenced to 2 to 5 years, and he was paroled December of 1971. In 1973, when he was 23, he married a 16-year-old child. Gross. Her name was Thomasine Lauren White, and this is while he was living in Portland, Oregon. While living in Portland, Oregon, he gets arrested for theft and breaking and entering, but the charges were dropped, and instead they admitted him to a psych ward because they thought he needed psychiatric help. However, he was released just 10 days later when they decided he wasn't a danger to himself and he didn't suffer from any mental illnesses. But a few weeks later, he tried to take his own life, and they sent him back for over a month. And he ends up struggling with his mental health this whole time. He tries to take his life multiple different times. I'm not going to tell you guys about every single individual one, but just know that that happens intermittently throughout the times that he's committing these crimes. On November 3rd of 1974, Thomas and his girlfriend Carol Spalding, he was still married to that other girl, but she was in and out of psych facilities and he was always cheating on her. So him and his girlfriend Carol, they are hitchhiking in Idaho and they are looking for a ride when a 1956 Buick Century pulls up and 2 guys were in the car. It was a 34-year-old named Edward Thomas Arnold and a 30-year-old named John Wayne Bradford. And they offered to give them a ride. They're super nice. They pick them up and they start driving them. And at one point on the drive, Thomas pulls out a gun and he kills both of them by shooting them in the back of the head. He then dumps both of their bodies along the highway. He drives a little farther and dumps the car. And both of their bodies were discovered, and the car full of all of the blood spatter were both found the next day. So 2 days after the murders, police have already had their eye on Thomas for a while because of 2 other murders that happened in Oregon, and they also had their eye on him because he was sending death threats to a Colorado senator. So he's really a mess of a person, and he's been on the police's radar for a while. So they bring him in, they bring Carol in, and they start questioning them. And he obviously doesn't say much. He tries to deny involvement, and while he is waiting for trial, he is in jail. And Carol, by the way, was a minor, because we already know he has a thing for child brides. So Carol was a minor when this occurred, but she turned 18 while they were waiting for the trial. And so they decide that they're going to charge Carol as an adult. In February of 1975, she ends up pleading guilty. She takes a plea deal, and she pleads guilty for harboring a fugitive, and she gets 2 years in Idaho. Meanwhile, he has still been saying he's innocent. In the fall, though, he ends up changing that he's innocent, and he says that he did kill them. He confesses that he killed them, but that they pulled a knife on them and threatened to assault Carol, and so he says it was self-defense, which obviously he is lying. But now that is the argument for part of the trial. However, right after he takes a stand at his own trial, it's now October of 1975, the prosecution is worried they might not get him on this. They are like, we don't have enough evidence, he's gonna walk, like, this is not good. And then Thomas just gives a shocking confession. Instead of saying that this was self-defense and all that kind of stuff, he suddenly admits openly that he is a serial killer. He says that he has killed at least 42 different people in almost a dozen different states. So obviously anyone who thought he still could have been innocent no longer thinks that. He said that his first murder was when he was 25 and he drowned a friend in Ohio. He also said in the fall of 1966, when he was only 16, he killed a gay man in San Francisco, and then he said he killed 5 people in Ohio that were contract killings for a satanic cult in the area, and they ended up having these people be part of ritualistic human sacrifices. So he says he killed 5 people through that, and then he also says he knows of 2 different burial grounds with over 100 different victims. But when they look into these, they only find cow bones. So they're like, okay, is he telling the truth? Is he lying? We can't tell. While his confessions are surprising, at first the police are kind of like not believing him. They go to these like burial sites and they're all cow bones, and they're like, okay, this guy's just pulling our leg. He's messing with us. He just wants attention. Like, he's probably not a serial killer. However, they look into him and they end up being able to link him to 9 other murders. And I couldn't find details on all of them, but the 6 I could find details on were Vivian Grant Robinson. She was 50 years old and he strangled her in her home in Sacramento, California. When they did investigate her case, it remained unsolved until he confessed on trial a year later. He also killed many years before William Joseph Dean, who's 22. His body was found in Thomas's old church living quarters. For a while he lived in a church, and William was found in his living quarters, and Thomas had shot him to kill him. They also connected him to the murder of Sandra Jane Ramsamuk, who was 19 years old, and they think he killed her in the grocery store that she worked at, and he shot her. He also killed Gordon Lee Stanton, who was 44, and Charles Thomas Miller, somewhere near Las Vegas, but they're not entirely sure where. And then Rick Stewart McKenzie, who was 22, near Wyoming, and he led them to their 3 bodies. He also killed a 70-year-old man named Paul C. Schrader, who he stabbed to death. It sounds like he was trying to rob him when they were staying at the same hotel, and he ended up killing him after the robbery. He then used Paul's credit cards and vehicle, and then ended up fleeing to Oregon for a while, and it sounds like that's when he took some of the other victims. He was found guilty and charged for 3 of the murder convictions. He was tried for Paul's death, but was acquitted by the jury, but officials are confident that he was the one who killed him. So in total, he was found guilty for 5 different victims, but again, he confessed to 42 different victims, and many of them, he said, occurred in Idaho. He ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences and was sentenced to death by hanging, but eventually his execution was changed, and he ended up being scheduled for an execution via lethal injection, but somehow he ended up surviving this because they ended up botching the lethal injection. They ended up taking over an hour of trying to inject him, and it sounds like they just kept failing, and so it ended up being like not ethical anymore, I guess, or something like that. So they ended up stopping, and he basically survived a botched execution attempt by the state. So after this, he keeps like refacing executions, and they keep getting postponed or rescheduled or challenged because he'd already faced execution once and survived, and so people were debating if that was ethical to try to execute him again. And so things just kept getting pushed back, and in November 11th of 2024, so just a year ago, a judge postponed his execution date again, saying that an attempt to execute Mr. Creech by any method after a botched execution attempt would represent torture and a lingering death. And so right now, his execution date was postponed, and it sounds like he will not be executed, but that could change eventually. He was a very scary guy, and his wife ended up taking her life many years after they got together, and many people think that part of that is because she knew all of the things that he was doing and she couldn't live with it. Let me know what state you guys want me to cover next for part 31 of the series.
The faceless people strike again this morning, and I have a pretty good reason why I'm seeing them, and this is crazy, but stick around for this one. So this morning around 6:30, you know, like this is the time that I wake up, I take my medications, and then, you know, like I head to the store, you know, to grab some breakfast, grab some stuff to actually come back home and cook some breakfast. So I went to the store, the same store that I usually go to. It's right there, right down the street. And many times I post a video about the faceless people. It always happened at that store, right? At that store. And as I'm grabbing the stuff, like this old lady, you know, I felt like she was like following me. Like every aisle that I went to, there she was. And then she's like trying to grab things, you know, like read through the labels and stuff like that. So I'm not paying her no mind. Usually, like, I have my hoodie on. I just want to grab what I came to grab, and I leave the store. But like, something just told me there was something off about her. I keep seeing like the side of her face, but not really the front of her face. So I walked down the aisle where she's actually at, and then she turned and she looked at me again, like no face, blurred, completely blurred, and it's not my vision. I have perfect vision, guys. And I'm like, oh, in my head I'm like, again? I'm seeing these things again? All right, so I kept on moving, and then it just hit me. I'm like, why am I, every time that like I should go to that store, you know, like most likely I end up seeing these faceless people. Like, what is going on? Is this place is grounded on some kind of like haunted ground or something, or the area is haunted? And I'm just like thinking about it. There's a huge cemetery, not even like walking distance. You can just like literally just walk behind the store, and then you can actually look at the cemetery that is divided by the street. One side is veterans, right? The other side is like local people, you know, like, and it's huge, massive. And every time I drive down that street, I always have this unsettled feeling about the cemetery. Like, it just felt like so heavy when I drive by it. And I'm just thinking, maybe these are not people at all. Maybe I'm the only one seeing them. Maybe they are unalive people. And then I'm the only one who is actually making contact with them, or they making contact with me. Because what I realize is that as I'm observing their movement, I'm observing what they're doing, no one else is paying attention to them. They're just walking by, like they don't see that they're around, that they even exist. Like, it makes no sense to me. You know, like, their movement is just so weird. And then, like, the fact that they don't have no, like, no face. There's no structure at all. But, like, this blur vision that I'm looking at. That had happened, like, so many times. And now I'm understanding, like, it has to do with the cemetery. Because I've been living here for a long time. That store never existed. And then they ended up, like, building an entire plaza with the store, like, right next to the cemetery. So, allegedly, because I don't know everything yet, and this is something that I'm going to investigate on my own, do some research, this place is actually connected, the land, you know, with the cemetery. And that has to do a lot with me seeing these faceless people. They're not actually people. They don't even exist. They just literally spirits, like, roaming through the you know, like, the area that is connected, the cemetery with the plaza. Isn't that crazy?